Hey everybody, welcome back to Bleyl Dev. Today we're going to be going over a full Flutter course for beginners. So this is for people who have never done Flutter before but want to get into it, see what it's about, get a little familiar with how it works. And so we're going to be going over what Flutter is, Flutter setup, and building your first application. So let's get into it. So chances are, if you're watching this video, you've probably heard a lot of hype and a lot of things regarding Flutter from a friend or online, or you're just curious to get into mobile development and this is the first place you looked. So Flutter, to give a quick recap of what it is if you're unfamiliar, it is a framework that utilizes a language called Dart. It's backed by Google. They manage it. They have teams that further develop it. And although it is open source, it's closely managed by the Google team. Flutter allows you to build multiple different applications on various platforms, all from a single code base. So it's what we call a cross-platform development framework. Now, if you're a little unfamiliar with those kinds of terminology, basically what it means is I can write a single bit of code and it will publish to iOS devices, Android devices, and if you'd like to, you can also do desktop apps such as Windows, Mac, or Linux, or even websites. The bottom line is, though, it's a great framework to use if you want to build some mobile applications or if you have some desktop applications as well that you're considering building. If frequent Flutter content sounds like something you'd be interested in, make sure you first smash that like button to help the YouTube algorithm so others can find my video. And also be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can get weekly Flutter content. So now that we've talked at a high level about what Flutter is, let's get a little bit more into it and how it works. So Flutter utilizes something that we call a widget. A widget can be any type of object that you see on a screen. A container, a form, a text field, a button. All of these are what we consider widgets. They're containers that perform some kind of function and they encapsulate other information and other widgets within them. So what we do in Flutter is we have what we call a widget tree, where basically we build widgets upon widgets upon widgets. So let's say we have a screen. We would first create a scaffold as our base widget, or some kind of object to contain all of the core information, the screen that you see. Then within that widget, we could have another widget that's called a column. And a column, basically, it's a list of widgets that go vertically. So we could have at the top a logo, we could then have a text field, and then we could have a button. And the user inputs something in the text field. When they click the button, something happens. So there's 3 widgets within that column. So the idea is, though, is that we're building this tree of widgets that kind of build upon each other and are nested within each other. And a lot of what you do in Flutter is dependent on these widgets and on this widget tree structure. And so we're going to get to see and play around with that firsthand in the application that we're going to be building. But first, we need to make sure that you have Flutter installed and set up on your computer. So in this specific video, we're not going to get too into the details of installing Flutter. I am going to direct you to some resources that you can use if you're struggling to install it yourself, however. The first one, and this is the most important one, the Flutter documentation has a clean setup on how to install everything on your computer. Personally, I use a MacBook most often, and so I'm going to click on Mac OS, and you can see here that it'll tell you, 1, if your Mac has the capabilities of handling Flutter, and 2, the steps you need to follow for downloading Flutter. So you can see here, you can download 2.0.4, Flutter 2.0, it's the newer version, and then you can update your path on your computer to include Flutter. And once you do that, you should be able to run Flutter, assuming you have a couple of other little things installed, which it talks about how to set that up. Now, if working with the command line and in the terminal on Mac or Windows or Linux is something that seems a little bit difficult for you to grasp right now, there is a slightly easier way that you can go about installing Flutter on your computer, and that is by going to Yazid Al-Khalaf's, excuse me if I pronounced that wrong, his installer that he made. So he created this installer for Flutter, where basically you can download it from this link for Windows, macOS, and Linux. And basically, it's just a, how can I describe it? It's just a pop-up. It's like an application that you walk through some steps and it will automatically configure your computer and set up Flutter on your computer for you. So you don't have to do anything with the command line or the terminal. So I'll direct you and I'll put some links down below if you find that useful. And I'll direct you to these resources that you can use for downloading it. I'll also include 1 or 2 YouTube video links on how to install it, or maybe fixing some common issues that come about when installing Flutter. So check the description below and I'll put some links to these resources for you if you need help with that. Okay, now that you have Flutter installed, the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna create a blank brand new project. So I'm gonna be working out of Visual Studio Code through this project. You're welcome to use Android Studio as well. Both work great. Android Studio, when you first pull it up, you'll see a page just like this. And as you can see here, it should say start a new Flutter project. And upon clicking that, it'll create the base template project for you. If you don't see that, however, you can go to configure, and then we can go to plugins. And then you just want to make sure that you have the Dart plugin installed and the Flutter plugin installed. And you should be good to go. Once you install those, you should see the Start a New Flutter project appear. Now, like I said, I'm going to be working out of Visual Studio Code, so I'm just going to go to VS Code right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Command-Shift-P. I'm on Mac. I believe on Windows it's Control-Shift-P. I'm not 100% on that, so you may just have to fidget with it a little bit. But basically, we're getting to the command line here in VS Code, and you'll see here that I have this Flutter new application project right here. Now, before I click that, because I am going to click that to get it going, I do want to make it clear the reason that this appears is because I have some plugins already installed for Flutter, the main one being Flutter and Dart. I also have this awesome Flutter Snippets plugin as well that I use quite frequently, but you don't need that to get a project going. So like I said, I'm going to go back, create a new project, and I'm going to place this just on my desktop. And let's see what we're going to call it. Let's say Flutter Complete Demo. Perfect. Let me go ahead and make this application the size of my screen. Perfect. All right. And I'm going to increase the size of VS Code. That way, if you're on a mobile device, you can follow along a lot easier with me. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the project architecture before we get into writing code in Flutter. Now, we have a couple of core things that are important to us. We have an Android folder. We have an iOS folder. We have this folder called lib. And then going down here, this is one of the most important pieces. We have this pubspec.yaml document. So what we have here, pubspec.yaml is where you're going to put all your packages. It's where you're going to put any assets that you want to put into your project. So if you have images that you want to use, audio files, videos, you're going to import them through the pubspec.yaml file. And like I was saying, this is where we put all of our dependencies. And so you're actually going to use this quite frequently as you go along, because there's some amazing packages out there that people have made that simplify writing code in Flutter a great deal. And some of the other packages that are also important to use are things like Firebase Auth. So if you want to do authentication, logging in a user, you can do that with Firebase through that package. So there's a lot of useful things that you're going to do with your pubspec.yaml file. For this demo, though, we're not going to get into packages quite yet. I'll put that in another video. We're going to focus mainly on our lib folder. So our lib folder is where all of our core Flutter code resides. So you can see here, we have this main method, and then it calls this method called runApp. So what it's going to do is when we spin up our code, we're going to pull up in an emulator to see our mobile application in working in progress. And it's going to first call this main method. The main method is going to run any necessary logic that you put in front of it. And then ultimately, it's going to call this method runApp. And it's going to pass myApp. And all myApp is, it's going to return a material. Or let me close this so we can see it a little bit better. It's kind of going all over the place. It's going to return this material app widget. And basically, all of our code for our project is going to reside within this material app in some manner. So we're going to let me go ahead and remove some of this just so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. So we have a theme established, we have a title for our project established, and then our core app is going to be under home. So home is going to direct us to this homepage widget. And that's basically all of our code that you see on the screen is going to reside within home in one way or another. So what we're going to do here, and I do want to clarify another thing. Whenever we build our application, what's going to happen is everything within the lib is going to be configured for both iOS and for Android. And all the necessary things that need to be changed and updated are going to be done to these two repos. And so we can, from this single bit of code, we can go ahead and we can run an application on Android emulator as well as an iOS emulator. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to pull up in the iOS simulator. And the first time that you run your application, it's going to take you a little bit. It's going to take a second to build that initial time. And also, if you can hear in the background, my computer is starting to kick on the fans. It is going to heat up quite a bit that first time that you run your application. It's also partly due to the video software I'm also running at the same time, but it's mostly due to the fact that we're running a Flutter project for the first time. Okay, so it looks like it's building right now. And what it's going to do, every time you press play, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to run a pub get command, which is basically going to say, I'm going to look at my pubspec.yaml file, see if there's anything that's been updated, any new assets placed in there, any new dependencies placed in there, and I'm going to basically tell my project, hey, I've got some changes, let's update it. The next thing that it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and build the application for either iOS or Android. It kind of depends on which emulator you have open. In my case, it's building for iOS. And so you can see here below, it says running Xcode build, and it's going to build here. You can see here, I've got a couple other applications that have been built in the past. And you'll notice, let me exit out of those. You'll notice that it just added this new one called Flutter Complete. And if we were to see the rest of it, it would probably say Complete Demo. But I'm going to go ahead and open them back up. And this is our Flutter application. This is the default project that Flutter comes with. So we have here a page where basically I can press this counter and it updates in real time. And you can see that it's the same thing because if I go here from Flutter demo homepage, I can say Flutter complete demo. I can save it, and then you can see here it updated in real time for me. That is called the hot reload. So basically, we can make any changes that we want that don't affect the state of the application. And by clicking just Control S, saving the file, it is going to go ahead and automatically update our screen for us. So we can code and we don't have to keep on rebuilding and rerunning our application. We can just keep it open and start working away, and it'll update as we're making changes to our code. If you want to fully relaunch the application, we can do a restart, which is this little loop button right here. So we have hot restart, hot reload, and we have a hot restart. So I'm going to click that. You can see here it said restarted application. It reset it to 0, and I can keep going on my merry way. So let's get a little bit further into what exactly is going on, how we get this 11 on the screen in this text, how we get that button on the screen, and where all that's coming from. So I'm going to just go ahead and clear out some of these comments here, just so it's a little bit easier to follow along and read. I'm going to close out of that. I'm going to do this. Just bear with me for a second. There's a lot of comments in here on the initial default application. Okay, so let's take it from the top. As mentioned earlier, basically our entire application is residing within this home option right here. And so in this case, we have my home page, which is what it calls. My home page is a stateful widget. It has a title. And you can see here that it calls my homepage state. So we go down here, we have a counter variable, and then we have an increment counter method. And you'll notice it's very similar to Java or JavaScript, basically any other object-oriented program that you've worked with in the past. Dart is very similar. And it is important to note that this is Dart. This is the Dart language. If you're unfamiliar, a framework and a language are two different things. Language is what we see here, like Java, JavaScript, Dart, Python. A framework is basically a library that contains useful things to help you build upon that language. So Flutter is one of these frameworks. Okay, so going down here, this is the core piece to every class that we're always going to be interested in. And let me put a space here. We have this widget build method. And basically what it's doing is when we call on home, when we call my home page, it's basically going to say, let's place this giant widget on the screen. And so everything you're seeing here, from this blue header all the way down to the white at the bottom, that is all contained within this scaffold widget. Okay? And you need a scaffold widget at the root of your application to build this screen. Now you can see here we have a couple things. We have an app bar, and that contains an app bar widget. And so this is all within our scaffold. Scaffold can have an app bar, and that is what you see here in blue. We placed a title there. We have, going down, we're going to skip over body. We're going to look at this. We have a floating action button, and that is what you see here, this counter. And you can see that when the button is pressed, we call our increment counter method, which is going to update the value of counter by 1. And then the core piece that we're very interested in, and it's important to know where to place widgets, is our body widget, our body option within our scaffold. And this is where all of our widgets are going to be contained. So we have a center widget that basically aligns everything to the center of the screen. And then within that, we have a column widget, as discussed at the beginning. A column widget lists everything vertically, so top to bottom. And so we can have an alignment on that column. And when we call this main axis alignment, it's going to align things vertically. There's another option here called cross-axis alignment. And let's do end so you can see what this looks like. You can see it pushes everything to the far right side. So that's going to control things horizontally because we're dealing with a column. The default is always going to be the direction that the widget goes. And these values are only applicable to rows and columns. But these are two widgets that you're going to use a lot, and so it's good to get familiar with what they do. The next thing that we have within our column widget, and you can see here, we're starting to nest widgets inside of each other. We have our scaffold. Inside the scaffold, we have a center. Inside the center, we have a column. Inside the column, we have a list of other widgets that are stacked. So you can see here, we have a text widget, which is basically you just place text exactly as it sounds. And you can see here, we say you have pushed this button this many times. That's this line right here. Let me go ahead and save this so it readjusts to the middle. And then we have another text widget that contains the value of our counter variable. So anytime we click this button, counter is going to get updated. Not only that, but we call the setState method, which is going to refresh the state of the screen and rebuild the page for us so that we can, or rebuild everything within this class so that we can see the updated value on the screen. Okay, so if I wanted to add, let's add another thing. Let's say I want to add an outline button. There's various types of buttons. This one's going to be called an outline button. It's going to contain a text as its as the widget inside of it. And so I'm just going to say hello world. And I'm going to say on pressed, not on long pressed. And I'm going to print hello world. Saving. Let's look. Okay, we have this button. I'm clicking it a lot of times, and if I open up my debugger console, you can see here that it typed hello world 17 different times for us. So you can see here with the column, we can add as many widgets as we want, but we could potentially have some issues to where there's an overflow and they don't all fit on the screen, in which case we need to have some sort of widget that we can scroll with. So we're not going to get into that. The focus of this initial demo is what we're going to do next. I'm going to show you how to import assets. So we're going to have an image of a logo at the very top. We're going to have 2 text fields. So a place where the user can input some text. So we're going to say like a username and a password. And then we're going to have a button. And when the button is pressed, some sort of action is going to take place. And maybe we'll also do a little bit of routing to a new page. And so we're going to cover a lot of the basics with Flutter in this short, small application. We're going to create widgets, handle data, handle routing. So let's get into that. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to get rid of all the things that I do not need for this. The first being our button. The second being our app bar. And I'm going to remove everything within this column widget. So everything contained under this children tag, I'm going to remove. So all I'm left with is a scaffold widget that basically has nothing inside of it. It's got a center widget and a column widget, but since those contain nothing, we see nothing on the page, right? And so I'm going to start off by saying logo here. I'm going to use this as a placeholder. And after each widget in a list, you do need to put a comma as a breakpoint before the next line. And same goes for any options within a widget. So you can see here we have main axis alignment. We put a comma at the end, then we say children, then we put a comma after children. And if there were other things in the column we wanted to add, we keep on putting a comma after everything. And that's just going to help format our code nicely with the Dart formatter. Okay, so we're going to say logo here. We're going to say text field here. And these are just placeholders. We're going to eventually remove these. Okay, so we have 4 key widgets we're going to have. We're going to have a logo, a text field, another text field, and a button. And this one's going to be text field username. And this one's going to be text field password. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm actually going to close out of my emulator. I'm going to go to my root folder of my project. So I've got my YAML file here. I'm going to add a new folder called assets. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get an image. Let's see here. I'm going to put this off to the side. And I'm going to find an image. I'm going to find an image that we can use for this application. So I've got one here that I like. I'm going to drag it over. And it's just a dark gray version of Flutter. Okay. And I'm going to leave it with that name. That name is fine. And you can see here, it actually even tells you in the comments how to do this, how to import assets. So we're going to kind of copy that. We're going to say assets, do a tab, dash, and I'm going to say assets / flutter dark gray.png. I don't need any of this. I'm going to shorten my file a little bit. Okay, so I've got that imported now, and upon saving, it'll run Flutter pub get. So I can close that now, close that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to do our image. So we're going to go ahead and right here, I'm going to create a container widget. And a container widget is basically, think of it as a box, and it contains anything. And we can style it to look a certain way, to shape a different way. And basically, it's just going to, the only reason I'm using it is to have a fixed width and height for our image. The container itself, though, isn't going to be visible. So we just want to use it to make sure that our image stays a certain size. So I'm going to add a width on this. I'm just going to say 100. And I'm going to say a height of also 100. And then I'm going to give it a child. And the child is going to be image.asset. And for the asset name, I'm going to go back to my pubspec.yaml. And it's going to be the name of the path to our file. And let's go ahead and test this out. I'm going to run the iOS simulator. Close that. I'm going to say run without debugging. I'm going to put a trailing comma here, a trailing comma here, and you can see that with each time I do that, it formats it a little bit better. Okay, it's still building. Let's give it a second. It should update. I believe it's this one right here. This is the most recent one that we did. Yep, just updated. Opening. Awesome, we have our image. Now that might be a little bit too small, so I'm going to update this to 250. Perfect, that looks great. Okay, so we have our image. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add our text field. So let's go ahead and add that text form field is what I'm going to call it. And we're going to have several things in this text form field. The first thing, however, that we need is a controller. A controller is going to capture the value that the user inputs into this field. So let's first create our controller for this. We're going to go to the top, right under counter. Actually, we can go ahead and delete these two because they're not being used anymore. And we're going to say text editing controller. And we're going to call this underscore, let's do username controller is equal to text editing controller object. We want to instantiate that. Okay, let's scroll down. Inside of our text form field, we're going to go ahead and assign that username controller to our controller field. So now you can see here, it's taking up the full screen right now. But now whatever we type in here, this is getting set to our username controller. It's being captured by that controller. You'll notice the other thing right now is that one, the coloring is not what we want it to be. I want it to just be black, not this blue that you see here. And also it's too wide. The width is taking up the full screen. We don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this widget. I'm going to create a padding widget. And I'm going to paste this within the padding widget. And then I'm going to give this a padding of what we call edge insets dot, let's see, dot only. And then we're going to give it a padding on the left side of 50, on the right side of 50, and on the bottom of 10. Perfect. So it gave it a little bit of padding before it hits that next text field, and then it brought it in on the sides by 50 pixels. Okay. And you're probably a little bit confused on where I'm pulling out all these widgets from. There are hundreds of widgets. Over time, you're going to start to familiarize yourselves with more. But as you start progressing and learning more about Flutter, you're going to be able to start typing on Stack Overflow and looking at the documentation on Flutter and discovering more widgets that will help you accomplish what you're trying to do. For now, though, you can follow along and utilize the same widgets I'm using, and then from there you can start exploring a little bit on your own and messing around with it a little bit more. Okay, so the next thing we need is we need to continue updating this text form field. Like I said, the coloring's not what we want it to be. The width is okay now, and you can see here if I hover over this, these are all of the different options available to us for styling and working on this specific widgets, customizing it to our needs. And so there's actually a couple that we're going to be using. The first one being this input decoration. We're also going to be utilizing, let's see here, where is it? There it is, text style. I saw it when I was talking earlier and then I lost it and I couldn't remember which one it was. So I'm going to do the style first, so text style. So you'll also see here, let me delete this, but whenever we create, we input one of these options, if you just hover over it, you'll see that it tells you exactly what type of object it needs to be set to. So a text style widget is basically going to allow us to customize any text. So we can add a color. So we want to say colors.black. We can say a font size. And I can set it to, let's say, 22. And you'll see here, it's increased the size and it's made sure it's black. Now you'll notice the cursor color is not what we want it to be. So we can type in cursor color and then change that to black as well. You'll see here, now it looks black. And then the last thing we need to do is get this underline color. So that one's a little bit trickier. What we're going to need to do for that is we're going to need to do a decoration. And we're going to need to assign it an input decoration object. And we're going to need to do a border. So you'll see here there's a couple different borders that we have here. There's your default border, a border if there's an error in validation, a border for if the box is enabled, focus, disabled. There's a lot of different borders. So I'm actually going to default quite a few of these borders to an underline of black. So the first one I'm going to do is just your basic border. I'm going to assign it an underline border, underline input border. And I'm going to say border side. It's going to be equal to border side colors.black. Okay. And then we're going to have a focus border. Oh, I'm sorry, focused border. And that is going to be set to the exact same thing. And there we go. Now our underline has turned from blue to black. Now you may be wondering why it defaulted to blue, and the reason for that is everything in Flutter is going to default to the app theme, which is the blue color. If you want to change that, we can do it in two ways. We can customize it within the widget itself. There's also a way through our theme data to pre-assign colors to different things. So you can see here, we can pre-assign in the app theme a button color, a highlight color, divider color, and we can also store different colors so that we can reference them as well when we're doing customizations. I know this sounds a little confusing. Again, this is a concept that it's probably better to talk about in another video, so we're just going to keep on going with our text fields in the meantime. Okay, so there's a couple of little small things that we want to add on top of this to make this text field complete. The first being hints, and that is going to be contained within our input decoration. So if I say hint text, and we're going to say input username, and there we go. You see it's kind of like a faded gray. It says input username. Oh my goodness, can't type. And then I can input it there. Whenever I go back to no characters, it'll automatically pop that hint up again. We can also say hint style, and I can say text style. And I can say colors.red. And you see here it modifies it to red. So there's a lot of other things you can do to modify and customize this a little bit further. But I'm going to leave it at that. I'm next going to copy this entire widget that we just made, and I'm going to paste it in place of this one. The reason being is that we're going to basically do almost the exact same thing for our second field. The only difference being is that I want to update the controller to be a password controller. And I want to add an obscure text value set to true. Okay, and I'm going to go back up to the top, right under where we created our text editing controller for username, I'm going to now create one for password. Okay, let's scroll back down. So we now have our password controller set to controller. We've added this value obscure text, which is going to hide the characters as they're typed. And we are keeping the same styling that we did for the input username. I'm going to go ahead and look at this. We can test it. So let's do a Bleyl dev for the username. For password, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can see as I type, it obscures the previously typed text. Okay. So those are working how we want them to work. I'm now going to add in the button. And for this, there's several different things that we can do. We can do an outline button, as we've seen earlier in the demo, right? Where I have a child, let's say of text, outlined button. So it looks something like that. I can do raised buttons, although that is now deprecated with the most recent version. But that looks something like this, kind of like raised off of the page. But what I want to do is neither of these for this example. I'm actually going to create my own kind of custom button. I'm going to give it a container. In that container, I'm going to give it a material button. And that's going to have an onPressed method. Press the button. And I'm going to print that, actually. And material button is going to have a child of its own, which is going to be a text widget that says, press me. Okay. And you can see here, there's no border or anything. It's just a text widget. And everything highlighted right now that you see, that is the container. So the container is going to shrink to basically encapsulate just the area around everything inside of it, the widget inside of it. So if we were to make the widget inside of the container really big, the container would expand so that could still fit that widget inside of it. Unless we establish some boundaries on that widget. We want to basically say, I only want the width of this widget, this container, to be so big. Then it will only allow the widget inside of it to increase to that amount, but no more. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to add on a width, I'm going to add on a height, and I'm going to add on a border for this container. So what I'm going to do for this container is I'm first going to give it a width, and I'm not just going to give it a numerical value. You know, we could be having an application where somebody could be on an iPhone 6, something really, a screen really small because it's an older iPhone, or they could be doing a 12 Pro Max like we see here in this emulator. So the size of the screen could vary, and let's say we want the button to be different depending on the screen size. We want it to adapt and be responsive. So what we can do is we can say media query dot of context dot size dot width. I'm going to save, and you'll see here it now fills the entire width of the screen. So let's go ahead and break this down and see what this is all about. Media query, basically you pass it the context of what you're working with. So at the beginning of each class, let me scroll up here. You can see here we generated this value called context, which is a build context object inside of our widget. Now, because we are establishing this context at the start where our scaffold's defined, that context is basically going to say, you know, when we pass this to media query, it's going to say, I want you to get and capture the context of what I'm working with, which happens to be the entire screen right now. So what it's going to do is it's basically going to tell Media Query, I want you to get the details pertaining to the entire screen that I'm currently working with, which happens to be the full page of the application. Then what I want you to do is I want you to tell me what the size is, and even further, I want you to tell me what the width of that is. And so it's going to basically return a double value of the width of the entire screen that we're currently working with. And it's going to set that to width. And so that's why it's taking up that full screen. Now we don't want our button to take up the full screen. We only want it to take up, let's say like probably up to here, almost matching the width of our text fields. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say width divided by 1.2. And by doing that, we're essentially shaving off a little bit of the edges. And you can see here it's not exact, so maybe I'll do like a 1.3. And it's still not going to be exact, but it's going to be pretty close to what we want. And then you can also see here that the height isn't exactly what I want it to be. I could do the same thing, and I could say height is media query dot of context dot size dot height, and I could say divided by something like 10. And you can see here, this is exactly 1/10 of the screen's height, but screen sizes vary quite a bit, and I don't really want to change the height at all. I kind of want that value to be fixed. And so I'm just going to keep that at a fixed value of 50. And you can see here, that's a reasonably sized button. So there is still one more thing missing here, and that is a border around this button, because right now you can't really tell that it's a button that should be pressed. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a decoration to our container widget. It's going to be of type box decoration, and we're going to give it a border radius. And similar to HTML, CSS, and other languages that modify the UI of an application, border radius is a pretty straightforward object. It controls the cornering on objects. It's going to set all of them to a certain value. It's going to curve all of them to a certain extent. And we're going to place a double value right here of how much we want it to curve. And then I'm going to place a color. So let's do colors dot, let's see what amber looks like. Save it. Okay, so we get this kind of yellow, and you can see here it curved the edges. If we want to curve them even more, let's say 35, do something drastic. You can see here it really curved the edges and made it look like a more round button. Now we are going to need to do more styling to get rid of this. You can see here that there's some shadowing on the hover when you press, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to focus on functionality and getting us to route to a new page. So we have our input username, input password, and press me. Now press me currently does nothing. All it says is press the button. You can see here it said press the button 3 times. I'm going to click it one more. You can see here it just updated. What we want it to do instead is we want it to utilize the values that we just typed in. So we're going to say username is equal to username controller.text. I'm going to copy this, paste it, and say password is going to be equal to password controller.text. Give it a nice hot restart. I'm going to type in a username, type in a password, pressed it. You can see here that it successfully captured those values that I typed in. Now, the reason that this is useful is if we had authentication set up and we were working with Firebase or some other kind of service such as AWS Cognito, we could capture the values that the user inputs and sign a user into the application. So this process of capturing data in text fields is very useful. It's also useful because most applications have forms in some manner or another for inputting data and doing something with that data. And so that's what we're doing here. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to route to a new page entirely. So let's say when they press this button, let's just assume that we have everything set up for logging a user in and we want to route them into the home page of our application. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it homepage.dart. And I'm going to do a stateful widget and call it homepage. And you may be wondering how I just did this, how I just generated this super quickly. And the way that I did it is using the awesome widgets. Where is it? Extensions, plugins. I just lost it again. Extensions. It's awesome Flutter snippets package. So Nivash Ramdial, forgive me if I butchered that pronunciation, but created this amazing extension that you can use for Flutter. And this is in VS Code. But basically it allowed me to create a new stateful widget from scratch with ease without having to type all this out myself. So I've got this new page now called homepage. And what it is, it has a container. And I'm actually just going to do this. I'm going to give it a material widget instead. And I'll have a center widget inside of that. And I'll have one more widget that's a text widget that says homepage. Okay, enough of that page. I don't really care much about it. The one thing I want to do now is I want to route to that next page. Now we can do one of a couple things. We're going to be working with our navigator and just pushing the next route that we want to go to. But you can also set up more intricate, well-defined routing systems in your application that make it a little bit easier to route to new pages. But we're going to go with the default way with routing in your application, and that's by using navigator.push. Navigator.push is going to take two things. It's going to take a context and then the route that we want to push. And we're going to call this material page route. Let me go ahead and add some commas here just for the sake of it looking cleaner. And material page route is going to have a builder, which takes in a context and pushes on our new page, which I believe we called homepage. I'm going to import homepage. Okay. And give it those parentheses it needs. Alrighty. No more errors. So what we're going to do is we're going to print out the username, we're going to print out the password, and then we're going to navigate. We're basically going to push another screen on top of the screen we're currently working with. And that screen is going to be our homepage, which we just made. And if we look at our homepage, all it is a material widget that contains a text that says homepage. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this application. I'm going to input a username and a password, and I'm going to press this button. You'll see here printed Bleyl dev 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you saw that animation, you can go back and rewatch it again, but it slid this next page right on top of that page. You can see here, homepage. So we've successfully routed to a new page where you can now put another widget tree containing whatever it is that you need to do on that page. And just like that, you have successfully created your first Flutter application. So let's go through one more time everything that we've covered. We've covered the purpose of Flutter, installing Flutter, setting up your first project. We've covered importing and usage of images and other assets into your project, how to import those into your pubspec.yaml file, as seen here. We've covered basic usage of image widgets, text form fields, buttons, capturing data and using data, routing to new pages, and all of that. And so there's a million other things that you can do with Flutter. And I recommend that you watch some of my other videos and kind of explore and get a taste of what are some of those things that you can do. Pretty much any application that you want to build, however, you can do it with Flutter. It's going to take some time. Like I said, there's hundreds of different widgets out there, hundreds of different packages. So there's a lot of stuff that you can familiarize yourself with and use in your application, but that does take time to learn. But I encourage you just to build. Keep building. Pick a design or something that you really want to build. Pick an application you've been wanting to build for a while and just try to build it start to finish in Flutter. Google on your way, ask questions along your way, YouTube for tutorials and information on how to do things along the way. But the important thing is that you're building. Build, build, build. That's the best thing that you can do right now to get better and more comfortable working with Flutter. I hope this video and this tutorial was useful to you. I know that there's a lot more to be covered and you probably have a million more questions now that you've kind of gotten your feet in the water. I'm here if you need any help or have any questions. Feel free to join the Bleyl Dev Discord channel. We're always available to help, and there's others in the community who are willing to reach out and to help you with any questions that you might have. If you found this video useful, please click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It'll help the YouTube algorithm and help others to find this content as well as help me out and giving me the support that I need to keep on putting out these videos for you guys on a weekly basis. I hope you found this video useful. Again, I'll put a bunch of links and other helpful information in the description below that hopefully can help you get going. And I hope that this has sparked your curiosity just a little bit more. And I'll catch you guys next time.